Maybe I'll give a little context first, because I'm going to read a text to you in combination with this setup. Right now, I'm actually working on a totally different topic within the same PhD project, which is the high heel, which is a very different object than what this lecture is about. But the context of this lecture was specific to a conference in Vienna last year, which I think makes sense to say because it was an academic conference in which there are very strict presentation standards. And I've rewritten the text to what I've also been doing here a little bit. But for now, I was interested also into what it means to do this talk here and how this will work out. So I'll read the text to you, and then I'm also happy to start a conversation with you about it. Bring some example images of the bridle, replies the blacksmith when I asked him if we could make a Scold's bridle replica together. A Scold's bridle, also called the branks, is a metal contraption around the head that was invented in Europe in the late Middle Ages to silence assertive and opinionated women. Towns officials, local church authorities, or husbands had the power to enforce the bridle onto a woman's head. By the end of the 16th century, a European woman could be severely punished for any demonstration of independence and criticism against her husband. Obedience was a wife's primary duty. Scold's bridles were mostly composed of metal and leather. Different bridles had different gags. Some pressed down the tongue, inhibiting speech. Others would have gags with sharp edges or spikes, injuring the tongue when one tried to speak. It also occurred that women who raised their voices in defense of their social rights or who spoke up against someone high in office were bridled and paraded through the streets led by a chain. Like many other oppressive and violent inventions, tools, and ideas, Europeans enforced the bridle in other parts of the world. In the Americas, European plantation owners used a similar object, usually referred to as the mask of speechlessness, to exploit, dominate, and control by silencing enslaved people and to prevent them from speaking amongst each other. In Europe, the term scolding, from a legal perspective, became associated with women that behaved in opposition to the church and law. Scolding became connotated with a tendency towards independence, rejecting prioritizing marriage, forming community ties to support one another as women, and other acts that threatened norms of expectations of femininity as prescribed by the dominant organizing structures in times of emerging capitalist patriarchy. The Scold's bridle has been written about as a disciplinary object that has participated in the oppression and exploitation of women and black bodies, and the knowledge systems that evolved from partial perspectives and missing voices. In academic literature ranging from the late 19th century throughout the 20th century, up until recently, the bridle has been described as a mask muting the voice, so a tool generating a lack of voice that is an absence of a certain human vocal sound. But here I wonder, what besides generating an absence did the mask do? What performative aspects can we take from the mask beyond generating a lack? For instance, what acoustics did the bridle generate interacting with the human body? And what did the mask sound like for the person wearing it? Back to making a Scold's bridle replica. On a Tuesday evening, I visit the blacksmith that I approached. He lives in a traditional farm in the countryside in the south of the Netherlands, and that's the region where I'm from, and also not far from where it's known Scold's bridles had been used in the past. I commissioned the blacksmith to make a bridle following the European model. After a coffee in his kitchen, we go into the small barn next door. He switches on the radio, set on classical rock radio station, lights the fire in the fireplace, and turns on the strong ventilation and oxygen blower from below the fire so it will get hot enough. There are many images of horses and all kinds of models of horseshoes hanging on the wall. While we select the right thickness of the metal, I show him online images on my phone of original Scold's bridles as preserved at the Wellcome Collection in London. I also show him images of what the bridle looks like when it's placed on a person's head. He starts smithing the bridle. He heats pieces of metal in the fire and when taken out, bends them with a loud hammer on an anvil. His precise work is to make sure the bridle fits well around the head and to make the hinges open and close properly. When he tells me about the different ways of attaching parts of metal in the traditional pre-industrial way, we talk about the cruelty of the object's purpose. It's a shame we don't have such things anymore today, he jokes. I kind of laugh it away. I don't want to contest this statement, because I'm thankful for him being so generous to help me out. So I leave it for what it is, but I certainly disagree with him. I don't think we got rid of having such things as the Scold's bridle. In the article 21st Century Bridling, Victoria Pagan argues that the bridling of women is still present in today's social structures, may it be in disembodied form. She argues that non-disclosure agreements represent the latest in a continuum of tools used to silence women who seek justice for the misconduct of those in authority. The term non-disclosure agreement has become an umbrella term in the UK for a combination of standard contractual tools used to mute elements of employment experiences, for instance, settlement agreements, compromise agreements, confidentiality clauses, and their associated negotiation processes. Pagan says non-disclosure agreements are described colloquially as gagging clauses, just as the Scold's bridle gagged the bodies of women in the past. Pagan argues that both the bridle and the non-disclosure agreement are on a continuum of violence from the historical embodied to the present-day epistemic with embodied effects. She writes, and I quote, "The historical, fleshy, embodied punishment of the Scold's bridle resulted in a form of less material but no less embodied punishment." End of quote. Pagan thus connects the Scold's bridle and non-disclosure agreement by both situating them as a disciplinary tool under patriarchal and capitalist control. She differentiates the Scold's bridle from the non-disclosure agreement by making a distinction between the corporeality of the bridle on the one hand, and on the other hand, the non-corporeality of the non-disclosure agreement. Here I doubt how productive it is to determinately draw a line between corporeality and non-corporeality. Even though the non-disclosure agreement may be archived in the boss's office files, what if we approach the non-disclosure agreement as corporeal as the Scold's bridle to what we call the woman's body? Are visibility and proximity to the human flesh determining conditions for corporeality? When we approach the so-called body as a network of relations that reaches beyond what we call materiality and the human flesh, without fundamentally rooting its ontological status in visibility, the womanized body or feminized body is composed of many social relations, entangled with all sorts of matters. After working on the Scold's bridle replica with the blacksmith, I go home and place the object onto my own head. I look in the mirror and wonder what this moment means. The smell and taste of metal is nauseating and reminds me of blood. I walk away from the mirror and sit down on an armchair to listen closely. It's immediately striking how the bridle amplifies my own smacking sounds, tongue clicking, swallowing, and lips rubbing saliva over my teeth. Because these sounds are being guided by the metal arch that runs from my mouth to just below my ears, working as some sort of reflection board that spirals sound waves around my head. The gag disables my voice. My voice is muted to my surrounding, but my own flashy facial movements sound louder to my own ears, whereas they are, I imagine, barely noticeable to someone in my social space. It feels like an inward feedback experience, where there is a constant reminder of being encaged by an object that shuts down parts of me. It induces an increased sense of my own corporeality as extended by this metal object. It feels acoustically isolating. I can imagine that it must have felt like being disconnected from a social situation while being physically part of it. Being isolated even when being surrounded by others and loudly present to oneself. It makes me increasingly uncomfortable to wear the bridle, not necessarily because of the physical discomfort, but because I'm wearing it in a context in which I choose to do so. The relation from the bridle to my body is one of consent, and the relation of the bridle to its material existence, the making process, is one driven by my own curiosity and executed on my own terms. So I decide to take the bridle off and leave it on my desk. Cut through the audio cable right in the middle, says Nicholas Collins in a workshop on DIY hardware hacking. Then he instructs me to zip off about a fingertip of one of the cable's isolation material to lay bare its inner wires. Nicholas continues by showing how to split the wires and solder them on a piezoelectric ceramic disc. Then he instructs me to fold some electromagnetic tape over the soldered parts. He invites me to attach the freshly self-made contact microphone to a large and flexible metal coil and plug the cable into a speaker. A poingy sound emerges. A contact microphone senses audio vibrations through contact, for instance with solid objects. So I get home with my self-made contact microphone and grab the Scold's Bridle replica that I made a while ago with the blacksmith, the one that I tried onto my own head. I attach the contact microphone to the inner base of the bridle with some tape and plug the microphone cable into my mixer. Then I switch on the whole circuit consisting of the bridle replica, contact microphone, mixer, and speakers. Slowly, I turn the volume knob and can hear the contact microphone doing its work. In my left hand, I hold the bridle, and with my right hand, I tap my nails and fingers on the object's surfaces. I want to make it sound. I stroke its metal arches with my fingers and bang my knuckles against its parts. I try it from many angles, wishing to play it like a music instrument, but I'm not satisfied with the sounds it produces. So I put down the bridle on the edge of the table, on which also the mixer and the speakers are situated. Dissatisfied with the result, I walk away a few steps towards the door of the room because I want to get a snack from downstairs. Before I reach the door, a sound suddenly appears from the speakers. Suddenly, the bridle starts humming on its own. It's shaking, vibrating strongly without me doing anything to it. The contact microphone picks up the vibrations and through the speakers blasts the sound back towards the bridle. So the bridle keeps producing a droning sound with now and then higher and lower tones that harmonize with the foundational sound. The siren doesn't stop. A monstrous voice coming from a monstrous object produced by a monstrous system. So this is the sound setup that I reenacted here. And what is happening is that the Scold's Bridle vibrates on the sound coming from the speakers, which is the sound it itself produces through its amplified vibration. And therefore it forms an endless feedback loop. Instead of me demanding something of the object, it seems to demand something of me now. I'm curious what would happen when I try to exercise pressure with my fingers on the metal arches of the bridle with the attempt to suppress the trembling. So slowly I reach out my right hand to the bridle and strongly press one of the metal arches between my thumb and index finger. The sound changes shape, the volume decreases and the pitch peaks. When I press hard enough, the sound disappears, so I let go again, the sound reappears. I sit down in a chair next to the audio setup and spend the next hour or so with the ringing bridle and start writing the text I'm reading for you right now. It oddly feels like spending quality time with or making kin to the object. We are connected by vibrations. We vibrate simultaneously on the sound waves that come from the bridle itself. I remember the moment I put the bridle onto my own head, and this time I can speak. I drift off into the sound as some sort of portal to the past. A portal through which I'm imagining the internal screams for social justice and the awful feeling of being amplified to oneself without being able to express oneself. I fabulate about the ideas, wisdoms, and jokes that bridled bodies could not say, without necessarily filling that gap with words. After spending time with the humming bridle, I sit down to write an email to Nicholas Collins, who taught me how to make the contact microphone. He confirms my assumption that the Scold's bridle vibrates on the sound coming from the speakers, which is the sound it itself produces through its amplified vibration. Last year, I did a talk at Maastricht University about my practice, and Eliza Steinbock, professor of gender and diversity studies, said to me afterwards, "You work with a lot of men, right?" The following days, I wonder whether it matters that I work with a lot of men. When I made the Scold's bridle replica, it was a man who had the expertise and executed, on my request, the making of this immensely cruel object that was used to silence and discipline people from the past who behaved like me. I wonder whether this matters. In the process of making my very first piezo disc contact microphone, of which I knew I eventually wanted to stick it on the Scold's bridle, a man instructed me, and I wonder whether this matters. When I started working with sound, I was introduced to handling equipment such as speakers, cables, and microphones by a man. I wonder whether this matters. A man showed me for the first time how to adjust the input volume on the handheld sound recorder that I use frequently. I wonder whether this matters. A man confirmed the correctness of my technical theorizing about the feedbacking Scold's bridle that you can hear right now. I wonder whether this matters. So don't get me wrong here, I highly appreciate everything that I learned from every man involved in the process. I'm also not here to say it's wrong or bad to get instructions from men, especially not when explicitly asking for it. Instead, I wonder how the domination of masculinity in the field of sound and metal in this case might participate in the life of the material assemblage that made possible the sound that you can hear right now. In the same email from Nicholas Collins that I received about the bridle's feedback, he advised me to buy a graphic equalizer pedal and add it to the sound setup to shape the bridle's feedback sound a bit more by boosting and cutting certain frequency bands. And so I did. And when I received the package, I opened it and encountered this image. The box of this quite unhumorous technological tool has a guy on it who mimics some sort of guitar hero by means of a black wig, dark sunglasses, dollar sign necklace, spiky choker, and tough, maybe aggressive facial expression through showing his teeth. I connect the pedal as part of the feedbacking Scold's bridle circuit in between the bridle and the mixer, and I don't quite know how to unite the two situations, me who tries to shape the feedback sound of a reverberating Scold's bridle with the equalizer pedal as one situation, and the other situation as that very pedal being illustrated by the guitar hero showing his teeth. It seems to me that I'm not only working with a lot of men, as Eliza Steinbock pointed out, it's also that many materials have contributed to the sound that you can hear right now were presented through frames of masculinity, may it be in real-life context or through a product packaging. So the sound that you can hear as a baseline to this talk is a sound that emerges from many elements and processes coming together. The resonance of masculinity around materials such as metal and sound technologies, and the gendered presentations of these materials, for instance, by means of who commonly gives instructions about them or who appears on a packaging, feels odd to me at times. And in terms of what histories, networks, and processes that made this sound possible, I haven't even gone into the extractivism behind the used materials in the light of colonialism and ecological crisis. So focusing on the relationship between gender and sound, I came to realize in this specific sound setup of the Skulls-Bridal replica that it can feel lonely to establish effective material kinships, in this case with sound, sound equipment, and metal, in environments that are mostly saturated with masculine performativities. Oftentimes, being one of the few or the only feminized bodies in working spaces that conventionally appear as the property of masculinized hands and minds makes me feel too vulnerable to expose the effective ways of relating to a sounding object, like this humming Skulls-Bridal. This isolated feeling takes me back to the sensation of acoustic isolation when wearing the Skulls-Bridal onto my own head, silence to one's social space but amplified to oneself. So in isolation, I oftentimes keep these intimate material kinships to myself. The affective disconnection enabled by masculine performativities, such as a focus on technical details and show-off culture, I have felt to overcome in other types of spaces other than your go-to sound or metal workshop. When I'm surrounded by other femmes and or queers, I dare to commemorate the witches of the past and the things they were never able to say. And this last form of material kinship is a very different kind of relating to the materials as compared to being instructed about its technical details, for instance. Also, affective relating brings about different types of knowledge than mere technical knowledge. By all means, I don't want the expression of my experiences to become a pity party here. Instead, I approach moments of feeling isolated and disconnected in this artistic process as insightful moments, especially when juxtaposed with moments of feeling material kinship and connection elsewhere. Moments that can be placed on a continuum of gendered power dynamics from the past into the present. Moments that contain knowledge about the ways in which situated bodies relate to artistic and academic fields, where various materials circulate, embedded in all sorts of histories and power relations. So in this way, I hope to have given some insights in what I learned in this artistic process. And I'm happy to start a conversation with you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Luca. Questions? Maybe before, or I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about your work that you presented at Open Studios. Mm-hmm. Just to throw it out there, I think it relates beautifully to this research, and I think it can also give more coordinates for our conversation. Mm-hmm. So could you talk a little bit about the work you showed in Open Studios?
Yeah, I think most people have seen it that are here. So I installed 7 metal sheets that are made from the same steel as this replica is made of. And I also worked on the sheets of steel with my own saliva and vomit to make them corrode in unexpected ways. And I recorded actually kind of in the same place, different feedback moments of the bridal. So they came out as 10 different recordings with different sounds. Like it's already when you put, maybe if Sepida puts some pressure on the surface, you will hear the sound change. Oh, on the, yeah.
Okay, now I'm DJing.
So it's also all really dependent on circumstances. Even I noticed that when things happen in the streets, the feedback changes because it's an assemblage of sound that, like the contact microphone responds to vibrations, and they're all determined by how a context resonates with everything in that context. So I left the setup here and I closed the door and I let it record for 10 minutes and then I came back. And then I had 10 recordings with 10 different voices, or they were almost a bit like personalities to me. And then I fed those sounds back into the steel with transducers. So the vibrations, transducers do the opposite of a microphone. They don't take in the vibrations, but they send them back into the material. So that's what I did with the transducers in the 7 metal sheets that were hanging in the metal workshop. And I had some, I left the recordings for what they were. I just cut them at 10 minutes exactly, and then I composed a sound that would also work in the space well. So that's the process of how this came back into the installation. It's a bit... Yeah, I think it was more about the space than because I didn't work on the metal in the space. I actually used the space next door to work on the sheets because I didn't really need the equipment from the metal workshop, but the context of the metal workshop was important to me as a place where also, at some point I was just thinking a lot about this kind of split second before this first object was being made as this decision that we started shaping metal in this way, and then also with a link to weapons and the use of metal in different violent situations. And for me, the metal workshop also kind of was a way to enter that kind of domain of reflecting on the material as a space where metal is being worked with, not necessarily for that purpose, but just in a lineage of histories of places where metal has been worked on. So, yeah. And actually the process with Rob was really nice because it's also for me, like, it's like what I tried to say also, it's not about working with men that is the problem. It's the problem of masculinity that sticks to these kind of materials. And that makes it that we oftentimes only talk about the technical details of a setup, or that, you know, but to me that's sometimes not so interesting. And also sometimes I kind of refuse to know all the technical details for this reason, because it's almost like as if this kind of knowledge is above the effective way of relating to sound, or how sound resonates in a space. Like, it's oftentimes perceived as when you're very good at calculating where exactly a subwoofer should stand in the space, you're a pro, but feeling it out is considered hierarchically lower to work with sound this way. And I think for me that's also a way that I like to approach these kind of topics. And also it was really nice to talk with Rob about these things. So, yeah.
I have a technical question.
Oh no.
No, I was just wondering about the materiality. I wonder if different metals produce different sounds. And because this is a replica, if you have ever tried it out with an original piece, and I wonder if that would sound differently, or even if you would coat it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for sure that will change a lot, but not only the object itself, but the whole circumstance in which it feedbacks. But definitely this kind of steel is very dense. That's why it was also quite difficult to make these sheets of steel that were hanging in the metal workshop to make them sound, because when it's very dense, it's like you knock on a hard surface. It sounds less loud than when you would knock on a wooden box. So the less dense the metal is, the better it works, for instance, with these transducers. So with aluminium, it worked really well. But that for me was also, I wanted to stay close to what these objects were made of. And I haven't tried it on an original one because they're very well preserved, also in a collection that is being moved right now, so I cannot access them. But I think the feedback is not necessarily, it might even be that the difference of the way the feedback sounds on the same object in a different context might be bigger than on two different objects, if that makes sense. Because it's all circumstance, it's all this resonates because of how it's relating to each other and not necessarily how the object itself sounds.
So like in the archive or in the museum, it would sound completely differently. Like if you would apply the mic in the archive where those objects are stored, it would sound differently.
Yeah, when you place the object 1 centimeter, it sounds different. When you place it on the ground, it's just all like very, very subtle, because these kind of contact microphones, they're super open. They don't have like any way of kind of navigating the sound that it sounds nice. So if you tap on it, it will have a very loud sound. So that's why they're very sensitive. And it's not really the context of an archive, but it's just the material context that will make it change. Like on these chairs, it will sound very different. On these stairs, it will sound very different because the wood will amplify a lot. So yeah. If that answers your question.
Thank you, Luca. I wanted to ask you because now, especially after the comment of Olena, because I'm thinking, where do you position this sound that you are creating? It makes me think of I would say, this trendy idea of connecting sensors to mushrooms and trees and giving sound to them as something that connects to the non-human and that it's kind of voicing a sentiment of connectivity and you know, language exchange through sound. And I'm wondering, where do you place these sounds that you are making? Because in some ways they feel like on the opposite side, but they're also communicating with an object. And after Elena's question, I'm wondering if actually it's about the sound of the location or the place where it's where the object is standing rather than the object itself.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of a court in early modern England where someone would decide that this would be placed on top of a head rather than the object itself. So could you maybe expand a bit more on that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think how I position the sound is also, I think there's also this kind of danger with contact microphones specifically to position it as revealing some sort of truth about the object. And that's what I really don't want to do. Specifically because I don't think we can fill in those gaps of histories that have been erased by this object, or histories, voices, and knowledges. So in that sense, the sound to me became almost a space to, for me it was almost a spiritual moment when these sounds started appearing. It was a way of relating to that history without giving content to it, but also without necessarily finding out some truth about the materiality of the objects, because I think that can also be quite a tricky position to take. But it's also not necessarily like it does something else than when you place a contact microphone on mushrooms or trees or whatever. it's not a feedback sound. This is a feedback sound which is enabled by the technologies, which is enabled by the context, and it's not the object itself, it's the relational that enables that feedback. And to me, that relational is the most important, and that's also how I position the sound. And to me, that's like an effective space of reflecting on those histories, and that's also why I want to give it context when I present these, and not just as some sort of stripped reality of the object or something, because I think to me that's that's kind of a dangerous position to take, especially when it's about sound. It's often like talked about as if we can know the essence of it, but the essence is the relational, because the sound doesn't exist without its context. The space makes it sound differently, and that also relates to your second question, that I think, yeah, the context, it is more about the context than it is about the object in the end, I think, because it is, the object did what it did in relation to its context. And in that sense, I think it was also interesting to present this, this specific talk in an academic environment, where there was also a very different setup and a very, like, it was a funny moment because the dean of the university walked in and he thought there was a problem with the technical setup. So he tried to arrange all of it, but that also led in, it was a funny situation. But yeah, I think it also resonates with this environment where we are now. Like, it's close from where these objects have been used. It's not known that it was used in this town, but it might have been. We don't know. There's very little traces of the exact history of it, but that also, to me, doesn't really matter. Like, there's even literature arguing about, yeah, but they weren't used that much, so it wasn't that much of a problem. But I'm like, already that it exists, that these kind of objects make sense within a certain system is already enough, even if there was just one. So, yeah, I think in that sense, it also resonates with where we are now and what that means in relation to other parts of the world in which this was also imposed. So yeah, it's about relations rather than the object itself.
Thank you, Luca. It was very beautiful. And actually, I wanted to continue sort of like this conversation because for me also it was, you know, like it was really beautiful to see that how you built this argument based on this bridal, and then you continue into this kind of like a sonic kinship, like in each like a singular environment on its own, you know. But at the same time, it was so beautiful that you said that, you know, like there is no truth to that because it's not there, you know, like it's not possible because you are just producing this particular moment true to this particular moment, and it cannot reflect anything about, like, I don't know, like the bridal itself and what it can do. But I'm just wondering that how you can actually build the setup. I don't know, even now that you were talking about this kind of situation that like the dean thought that it's a technical problem, it's already triggered something for me. But I'm thinking that what sort of setup you can build to producing, to presenting, or to playing the sound that kind of be aligned to a kind of fiction that I don't want to say fiction as like an opposite to the truth. But I mean like the kind of fiction that you build it through this argument, you know, based on some kind of like an objective truth of the history or whatever. So, you know, like I'm trying to talk about like the artistic setting of the situation that allow people to hear the sound, but then also kind of asking that what is this sound, you know, like not being sure that they are listening to a sound of a certain absence or like silence, not listening to a technical sound, but also they understand that this is like a fictional sound of the argument that you are making, you know, like the setting, you know. So because, you know, like this is like a really beautiful everything around it, but, you know, like so many of the things over the conversation that we have now is start to reveal. So I'm just thinking that what sort of setting can actually, to some extent, can kind of activate it, you know?
And with it, you mean the fictional?
I mean, you know, like the setting, you know, because you are not going to change the sound because the sound is produced within the kind of like a feedback loop, you know. But I mean, like which sort of setting, you know, like for instance, am I want to be in a kind of enclosed space and listen to your argument and still hear the sound from like a really unknown sources. I don't know what this sound come from. I don't know even if it's a technical problem or if I'm listening to actually what I'm hearing about. You know, I mean, these sort of things.
Yeah, I think for this moment where we hear the sound and see the object also, it's a very violent object to see also. I think, to me, it's very important to give all this context that I just gave. But yeah, maybe this fictional space without necessarily creating a new narrative, but that the fictional remains a fictional without necessarily giving a content to it, but allowing that to be whatever it is for whoever. I think that is what I try to work from when making the installation in the metal workshop, because to me that was important to create a space where there is when you walk through the installation, you experience different chapters maybe, but not necessarily what these chapters mean, but that they are different spaces in a space. Yeah, so I think that's more the mentality that I try to work from, this like fictional, this way of fictionalizing, but then not necessarily giving words to it. Yeah. And I think it's interesting also when we talk about this, like I've also been reading a lot of Saidiya Hartman's work on critical fabulation, and it's a term used as a writing method to think about voices of the past that have not been represented in archives or that are not even present, and then specifically Black women's voices in archives of the transatlantic slavery. But she uses that term also as a writing, critical fabulation as a writing method from the question, what do we do with these narratives that we don't know? What I find interesting about her work is also that when you read it, there's so much sound language in how she writes. She calls it the noise in the archive. She calls it, she calls it noise and silence at the same time. And it's about, there's a lot of sound language in these ways of thinking about the gaps in history that have been created by power dynamics. And I think, I'm interested from that point of critical fabulation, not as a writing method, but maybe as a way to work with sound, but not necessarily to give linguistic voice to a missing history. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. I wanted to ask about in your install for Open Studios, like how did you negotiate, I guess, also the masculine history of like minimalism and monumentalism that are like very there?
Yeah.
And also what is relational, because you're speaking a lot about relational, and like what is it when we have a viewer there? I know you now spoke briefly to Sepede about how they move through the space, but then not that there is an answer, like a solution in a way, but like the relational for the viewer, is it like an encounter? Is it like what verb is it in this, in your exhibition?
Yeah, I think the question on minimalism is something I struggled with a lot. But I think at the same time, it's also, to me, it was also a process of trying to work around a way of presenting those materials that allude a lot to these minimalist tendencies, but at the same time to relate differently to the material. And I don't know if that was successful or not. But for me, that was the intention to work with also in this kind of monumental way of setting it up. And then, the process of working on the metal was almost like also a bit ritualistic for me, like to also be with Ugo in the same studio and to both have a practice that kind of resonates in a very different way. But like the vomiting was really intense, and that was also a moment that I almost saw as a way of instead of letting the material work on the body, work back on it with my own bodily material, and in that sense create a different relationship. But I don't know if that was successful. And in terms of the visitor or the audience, and I think, it was an encounter, also the way the space was set up, but at the same time I hoped it to be immersive for people to walk in, and that it would be inviting by the space I left between the sheets to experience it as a spatial sound and not just as a object in a distance. Yeah.
Cool. By the way, I do think it was successful. I just wanted to hear the, like, I knew from a viewer what I felt, but not your position.
But this brings me a little bit to some conversations that we had when encountering the installation, that you would get that pristine succession of metal sheets that really resonate with this like minimalist aesthetic, and also relation to space, like empowered relation to space. And then as soon as you turn and you see the backside of the sheets, you are confronted with this more visceral quality to it. So I think there's these, you are playing also with the discovery of the installation. There's also this frustration of this kind of overpowering aesthetic.
Yeah.
There's a question here. Yeah.
Luca, thanks for your talk. I have a question. Being a maker myself, I am wondering what the effect is of the reintroducing of an object which purpose was and is very brutal and obscene. And also because you just said with amazement that it exists even if it's just one. So I'm wondering, why did you make another one?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's also something that relates back to struggling for the way of showing it in the metal workshop. It was at some point the question, do I show the object or not? And I think the line is very thin between it becoming a tool for also understanding a history and how that history relates to the now, but also on the other side becoming a sensational thing, which I really, really don't want. But I think for me, the reason for reproducing it was also encountering literature, and it's part of a PhD project, so that's what you do at some point. Then to read a lot about it, and then encountering only third-person perspectives on this object of what it was like for a surrounding, because when a voice is taken away, it's for the surrounding, but not for the person themselves. So then well, in my PhD, I call it autoethnography, which is a method of ethnography in which you include yourself as a researcher to research a situation from an experience of the self, which is also debatable if that is so far away from ethnography after all. But that was the reason I was like, first-person perspectives are missing. What can we learn from wearing this object about the acoustics of it? And yeah, that's, I think, this amplification to the self and the sound of the mouth. It's really disgusting to hear your own spit all the time. But that's something I think is valuable knowledge in relation to the history of this object. And that was also the motivation of making it. But then this uncomfortable feeling of, at some point it just started feeling a bit like this sensational thing. And then I put it off, and then I was like, okay. And then all this sound started doing its thing. So yeah, that was the motivation behind making an object. Did you have another? Was that all your questions? I don't remember.
Yeah, What I would like to say is maybe destruction can be also be part of the process.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it also, disassembling it and slowly making it disappear again. But that's maybe for next step.
Reconstruct it to another world.
Yeah, I'm looking now into different acidities and how they, because the way I worked on the metal, I thought it was corrosion, but it's not. It was a acid attack. And I think it's interesting because it's, yeah, I want to try things on the material in this way, yeah.
Okay, last question. Celine.
Thank you so much. That was really very good. Wow, yeah. I was really curious to hear if you also see this reading in this shape as an autonomous performance, because you seem to have also staged it like that. I think the fact that you have this disclaimer of the sound will be on is really good, because indeed it makes you feel like it's supposed to be there, but then that it is clarified over time what is happening, and that this is not just a display but actually an active installation of which all the components are being clarified throughout. I think is yeah, I'm really curious to hear if you would see the reading of a paper or essay like this as an autonomous performance. And I was also curious about the writing, because you start many of the different chapters by something that a person said, and then going into the sonic and the bodily experience. And I was curious if you could say something about that writing process, because it's obviously very intentional.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's funny because it was also written within the confinements and within the boundaries of a conference. And it started being more than 20 minutes, so it's not a conference size anymore. But I think in that sense, the autonomy of it was shaped by how academia also demands knowledge to be delivered. And in that sense, this is mega experimental, but in another context, it's not. But it's funny because I've now done it in different contexts. And yeah, I do see it as a work now, which is funny because I wasn't really intended to be in this way. And it also changed a bit over time, more in the sense that it was not only narrating about a process, but really about an assemblage of materials coming together. And about the way of writing of what people say, I think I started writing this text that with more of a focus on being instructed and then the object instructing me back to do something. But that kind of went away, but kind of the things, the instructions or the comments, they remained. And I think I also kind of like that kind of writing. It happens often that someone says something, and also Lisbeth and I talked today about the appearance of horses everywhere in my research. Also with high heels, it starts with horses, and it's now also going back to the sound of horses and the animalistic related to the feminized and et cetera, et cetera. So it's like things people say, and I mean, that's also how a process goes, I think. And it's often also in academia, like not mentioned, but it's how processes often go when you have insights. It's because someone says something or because you think of something somewhere, and I don't think it's bad to mention that. So yeah, I hope that I can keep that, or I want to keep that writing also in my dissertation, or like the book that I'm writing now. I hope it's okay for the academic commission, but no, I like it. So yeah, I try to keep it in.
Thank you so much, Luca. Thanks for all the questions too. Very good. Well, Malina, what do you want us to do?
سبا مزار میرم جان لیلی دیدن یار میرم بابا لیلی سبا مزار میرم جان لیلی دیدن یار میرم بابا لیلی سبا مزار میرم جان لیلی دیدن یار میرم بابا لیلی سبا مزار میرم جان لیلی دیدن یار میرم بابا لیلی سبا مزار میرم جان لیلی دیدن یار
Okay, so actually, why I'm doing this, I really don't know. But I know one thing I need. Since the beginning of the year till now, I work, and then I don't even have one day that I would not work, not an entire year. So, and then I thought like, okay, what I really need, and only thing is rest. I just want to chill, rest, and no heavy more things, which is not possible, but at least 1 hour can do it. And that's why I call this resting. And I would like to invite you for something to chill, relax, and also would invite you for some embroidery. So because embroidery is also something that gives you rest in mind, at least. And why I choose embroidery, because one of the reasons is like I thought, I really need a rest, but how to get this, how to achieve? I went back to my roots, and my roots is in Afghanistan, and most women, when they do all work during the day, cleaning, washing, kids, all cooking, and then around the lunchtime, after the lunch, and then afternoon, they get, finally the kids sleep, all the work is done, and then in the middle they have like this 2-3 hours, and all the women comes in one home, because in every home there's 4 or 5 women, of course, and then they do embroidery and having a tea and eating something small things, and they're talking, and sometimes they are singing songs, and this is the only time for women when they rest. So, and I thought like, okay, maybe I can take this here to rest. And yeah, but maybe still I have something in back of my head. That's not possible, it's me. Of course. But don't think about work. So what you see, this fabric is about related to my work, which most of you know about Walking in the Sea, which was my map in the auditorium. No, where's project space? Yeah. During the open studios. I was inspired by that, and then I come up with a different thoughts. I say like, where we can start is like, for example, if we have the fully freedom of the world and we can create our own map of our own country, not world map, it's too big. We won't have this time. So if we create our personal map, and that's really related to you, and of course I'm talking also about geographical map, but can be also very personal, and how it looks like. You have the freedom. You can make your map so crazy or symbolic, anything, if you want to make that with embroidery. And that's, you don't need to think so much. The first thought comes, that's your map can be. And if you think like, oh, I don't care about geographical map or borders or so on, then you can choose. You can choose your personal map. Your personal map can be Maastricht, or can your home, your grandmother home. Anything can be. I'm more in a borders map interested, because also since 11 years almost I'm in the Netherlands, and I could not able to go back to my home. So this borders really affect on my life. But also there might be for other people, they don't care, which is totally welcome. So that's it. What you're gonna see is I will tell you the very basic way of embroidery, but you're fully open to go on with anything you want.
So, and why embroidery is that? Because as a kid, like before going to school, we are teach to the girls only in Afghanistan how to do embroidery. So, and this is the first embroidery I learned. So, and I would like to show it's very easy. You can follow this and you can follow something else. There are some needles also, very big ones, be careful. And maybe some knife or something. So choose what you like and also which fabric you want, just go for it. And let's see the video. It's maybe half minute. Okay, this can go on maybe 1 minute more if you want to see it again. It's very easy, but don't care about this. Just be free, do whatever you want. It's not about this technique. I just want to tell like something basic if you really need. Otherwise, no one needs this for sure. And then later, once you find out what you want, and then we can come up with the different questions. Yeah, the bigger needles. Please take the big ones. That's the center and the There are more colors even if you want. Can I see?
I'm also struggling with it. I think these are genuinely thick. It's not the first time.
Oh, yeah?
I already put mine.
I know. That's just
Okay, wait, I give you another one.
No, I will just use another.
All for it's the same. Maybe you take the glitter and then you open it. The glitters, you cut them and then you open it. It becomes thinner.
We are opening them. You still speaking to me. I already like.
Nadim, look it. I brought you a big glitter.
Can you like because this is so
So now I think everyone is ready with the needles. So, put the music a bit lower. Okay, so I would like to invite you for one question, and this question is not a question, it's more kind of discussion if you would like to have that around who are sitting next to you or in front of you. And that is, what is your personal relationship with your own country, your own nation borders, and also with your neighbors? How you define these borders in your life? How does it affect, if it affects? If you would like to share with your colleagues or anyone you feel like. Like, for example, for me, border means a lot, but I don't know if you have this experience and if you would like to share what does it mean when you're from different country and you have to ask for a visa, go through all this process in order to cross a border. So what does border means and effect and influence in your life? If you want to discuss this with others, if you want to.